In Buenos Aires, restaurant menus are sometimes printed without prices, not as a gimmick, out of necessity. Because by the time the ink dries, inflation has made the numbers wrong. In Tokyo, it's common for university graduates to accept salaries their parents earned in the 1990s, not as a starting point, as a ceiling, and they consider that normal. There's a joke economists tell. There are 4 types of economies in the world: developed, underdeveloped, Japan, and Argentina. Japan, 3rd largest economy on Earth, high technology, efficient infrastructure, one of the safest societies ever built, but wages haven't moved in 30 years. Argentina, some of the richest farmland in the world, educated population, natural resources most countries would envy, but the currency collapses every decade. One country has everything it needs to fail, but it doesn't. The other has everything it needs to succeed, but it doesn't. And here's what makes this disturbing. If you think one of these countries clearly got it right, you haven't been paying attention. This is the story of 2 countries stuck in opposite traps, and what they reveal about the limits of economic systems. Because sometimes the problem isn't making the wrong choice. It's that every choice comes with a cost nobody sees coming. Let's start with Japan, because Japan's story begins in a way most people don't expect. Not with a crisis, but with pressure from the outside. 1985, New York, the Plaza Hotel. The United States gathers Japan, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom into a room and delivers a message. The dollar is too strong, and it's creating massive trade imbalances that threaten the global economy. Something has to change.
The Plaza Accord, an agreement to sell dollars on worldwide currency markets in an effort to send the dollar and American export prices down.
Japan had no choice but to comply. Overnight, the yen appreciated dramatically against the dollar. Japanese exports, which had fueled the country's economic miracle, became significantly more expensive. Sony televisions, Toyota cars, Honda motorcycles, all of them suddenly cost more for American buyers. This should have slowed Japan's economy. That was the point. But Japan's central bank had a different idea. To soften the blow to exporters and keep the economy moving, the Bank of Japan slashed interest rates and flooded the system with cheap money, making it easier for businesses and individuals to borrow and spend domestically instead of relying on exports. That money had to go somewhere, and it went into real estate and stocks. By 1989, Japanese asset prices had inflated to levels that defied logic. Tokyo real estate was theoretically worth more than all of California. The grounds of the Imperial Palace were valued higher than the entire state of Florida. Company stocks traded at price-to-earnings ratios that would make modern investors laugh. This wasn't organic demand. This was policy-driven inflation, a way to absorb the shock of the Plaza Accord. And then, in 1991, it burst. Stock prices collapsed. Real estate values fell by 60%. Banks, which had lent aggressively against inflated assets, were suddenly holding trillions of yen in bad debt, loans that would never be repaid because the collateral backing them was now worth a fraction of what it had been. This is the moment when most economies experience a brutal reckoning. Banks fail, companies go bankrupt, unemployment spikes. It's painful, chaotic, and public. But Japan chose differently. The government and the Bank of Japan made a decision. No mass failures, no bank runs, no collapse that could destabilize society. Banks that should have been shut down were recapitalized and kept alive. Companies that couldn't repay their loans were given new ones, often by the same banks that had lent to them in the first place. Why? Because if the banks admitted those loans were worthless, they'd have to admit they were insolvent. And if the banks were insolvent, the entire financial system would look fragile. Depositors might panic, foreign investors might flee, so everyone agreed, quietly, to pretend. The companies pretended to be profitable. The banks pretended the loans were good. The government pretended the system was sound. And it worked. There was no financial panic, no social unrest, no generational trauma like the Great Depression. But there was a cost. These companies, thousands of them, became known as zombies. They were technically alive, but not really functioning. They could service their debt, barely, but they couldn't grow, they couldn't innovate, they couldn't hire aggressively or raise wages. And because they were kept alive, consuming credit and resources, new companies couldn't rise to replace them. Capital got trapped in the past. Young entrepreneurs couldn't get loans because banks were still tied to the zombies. Workers couldn't leave stagnant companies because the job market wasn't dynamic. And the entire economy settled into a kind of stasis, where nothing collapsed, but nothing moved forward either. And then there were the wages. Wages in Japan stopped growing. Not for a few years, but for 30 years. If you started working in Japan in 1995, your salary in 2020 was roughly the same, adjusted for inflation, as it had been when you started. The same job, the same ceiling, the same prospects your parents had. An entire generation came of age expecting something their parents took for granted. That hard work would lead to rising incomes, promotions, a better future for their children, and found that expectation no longer applied. Not because they weren't working hard, not because the economy was collapsing, but because the system had shifted into survival mode. And in survival mode, nobody gets a raise. Now here's where it gets complicated, because if you look at Japan's economy from the outside, at the macro level, stagnant wages, aging population, government debt exceeding 250% of GDP, it looks like a slow-motion disaster. But if you actually live there, it doesn't feel that way. Housing is affordable because property values don't inflate the way they do in London or New York. You can get a mortgage with an interest rate below 1%. Healthcare is excellent and accessible. Public transportation is cheap, reliable, and arrives on time to the second. Crime is almost non-existent. You don't need a university degree to find stable work because most companies will train you from scratch. The cost of living is low. So even if your salary isn't growing, you're not struggling to afford rent or food or healthcare the way people in high-growth economies often are. In fact, it's increasingly common for young professionals to live with their parents well into their 30s, not out of failure, but because there's simply no economic pressure or opportunity pushing them to move out and take risks. And that creates a strange paradox. By traditional economic metrics, GDP growth, wage increases, innovation rates, Japan is stagnating. But by quality of life metrics, safety, stability, affordability, social trust, Japan is thriving. So the question becomes, what are we actually measuring? And what are we optimizing for? Is an economy successful if GDP is growing, but people can't afford housing? Is it failing if wages are flat, but life is comfortable and secure? This is the trap Japan fell into. Not misery, not collapse, but comfort. When your life is stable, when your needs are met, when the trains run on time and the streets are safe and your job is secure, why would you risk anything? Why would you start a business when the system rewards stability over disruption? Why would you demand reform when the current system, for all its flaws, still functions? And when an entire generation grows up in that stability, expecting nothing more, they stop pushing for change. Ambition doesn't die. It just fades into the background because the future looks exactly like the present, and the present looks exactly like the past. This is what makes Japan's trap so insidious. It's not painful enough to force change. It's comfortable enough to make change feel unnecessary. In most countries, economic crises create urgency. Pain forces action. Collapse clears the system and makes space for something new. But in Japan, there was no collapse. And without collapse, there was no urgency. The zombie companies stayed alive. The banking system stayed intact. Wages stayed flat, and the political system, seeing no crisis, had no reason to push through painful reforms. Japan avoided disaster, but it also stopped moving. And 30 years later, it's still trying to figure out how to restart momentum in a system that's optimized entirely for stability. Now, let's talk about Argentina, because Argentina's story starts in a very different place. In the early 1900s, Argentina was one of the richest countries in the world. Not just in South America, in the world. Its GDP per capita rivaled that of France and Germany. It had some of the most fertile farmland on the planet, producing beef, wheat, and grain that fed Europe. It attracted waves of educated European immigrants, Italians, Spaniards, Germans, who brought skills, capital, and ambition. Argentina looked like it was on track to become a global superpower. And then, in 1914, two things happened that Argentina couldn't control. First, the Panama Canal opened. Before that, every ship traveling between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans had to pass by Argentina's coastline, around Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America. It was a natural stopping point. Easy to dock, fill your cargo hold with Argentine beef and grain, and continue your journey. The canal changed that. Ships could now cut straight through Central America, bypassing South America entirely. Argentina, almost overnight, lost its geographic advantage. It went from being on the main global shipping route to being a detour. And in the same year, World War I broke out. International capital flows, the foreign investment Argentina needed to build infrastructure, factories and industries, dried up almost immediately. Money stopped flowing into the country just as its access to global trade networks was being severed. Argentina went from being one of the best positioned economies in the world to being structurally isolated from the global system. And it never fully recovered. Into that vacuum, political instability rushed in. Military coups, authoritarian regimes, economic experiments that swung wildly between extremes. And in the middle of all that chaos, a political movement emerged that would define Argentina for the next century. Peronism. Named after Juan Perón, a military officer who became president in 1946. Peronism wasn't just an economic policy. It was a political identity, a movement that represented the working class against the elites, labor against capital, the people against the establishment. And here's the thing about Peronism. It never resolved the underlying conflict. It didn't create a system where labor and capital could coexist. It created a system where they took turns winning. And every time one side won, the other side spent the next few years trying to undo what had been done. This is how the cycle works. A Peronist government comes to power. It increases public spending. Wages rise. Social programs expand. People feel better, at least for a while. But where does the money come from? Not from taxes, not from growth, from printing. The central bank prints money to fund government spending. And at first, it works. The economy feels like it's booming. Employment rises. Consumer spending increases. But then inflation kicks in. Prices start rising faster than wages. Savings lose value. The currency weakens. People rush to exchange pesos for US dollars before their money becomes worthless. And eventually, the economy tips into crisis. A new government takes over, usually a more conservative, market-oriented one. It cuts public spending, stabilizes the currency, implements austerity measures. The economy starts to recover, inflation slows, investors return, cautiously. And then people remember that wages were higher under the Peronists, so they vote them back in. And the cycle starts again. This has happened in various forms for 70 years. Different leaders, different crises, but the same pattern. And each time it happens, investors and businesses learn the same lesson. Don't trust anything long term, because here's the mechanism that keeps Argentina trapped. when a new government comes in and promises reform, promises to stabilize the currency, control spending, build trust, nobody believes it. Not because the promises are insincere, but because they've heard those promises before and they've watched them collapse. So what do people do? They protect themselves immediately. Businesses don't invest in long-term projects because they assume the next crisis is coming. Foreign investors don't bring capital because they've been burned before. Middle-class families rush to convert their pesos into dollars and hide them at home because they don't trust banks. And that behavior, that rational, self-protective behavior, accelerates the very crisis everyone was afraid of. Capital flees, the currency weakens, inflation spikes, and people look at each other and say, "See, we were right not to trust it." This is the credibility trap. It's not that Argentina doesn't know what policies would work. Economists have written the playbook. Stabilize the currency, control government spending, build institutions people can trust, encourage long-term investment. But none of it matters if nobody believes it will last. And why would they? Political coalitions that attempt reform often collapse before completing their agenda, torn apart by internal disputes and personal ambitions. Governments that promise stability are routinely followed within a few years by another round of crisis and uncertainty. This pattern has repeated itself so many times that instability itself has become predictable. One economist described it this way: in Argentina, more happens in one day than in 5 seasons of House of Cards. Now, if you live in Argentina, here's what your daily economic life looks like. You don't save in pesos. You save in US dollars. But you don't keep them in a bank because the government has, multiple times in history, frozen bank accounts and converted people's dollar savings into pesos at an unfavorable exchange rate without asking. This actually has a name, the corralito. It means little fence. The government puts a fence around your money and you can't access it, so you keep cash at home, hidden, just in case. If you work, there's a good chance you're in the informal economy, working off the books, not paying taxes, not registered with the government. Why? Because formal employment in Argentina means facing a tax burden so high that between employer contributions and employee deductions, the total cost can approach or exceed 50% of gross wages. Even for modest incomes, the combination of national, provincial, and municipal taxes makes formal work economically punishing. The tax system is so complex and burdensome that even workers at the tax agency have been known to quietly advise low-income people on how to navigate it, occasionally even sympathizing with those who operate informally because they understand the system is broken. And if you want to start a business, good luck. The bureaucracy in Argentina makes the famously rigid German system look efficient by comparison. You need permits from multiple levels of government. You wait months, sometimes years, for approvals. And even when you get them, unions can shut you down. Not the kind of unions that negotiate wages and working conditions. The kind that extort businesses, force workers to join, paralyze supply chains, and act more like organized enforcers than labor organizations. And then there's the public sector. Argentina has a massive public employment problem. Thousands of people work in government jobs that don't produce anything, positions created purely to employ political allies. You might have multiple assistants working for officials in agencies with overlapping, redundant mandates, all funded by a tax base that can barely support the weight. It's not incompetence, it's patronage. It's how political power is maintained. And all of this, taxes, bureaucracy, instability, corruption, creates a system where the productive economy is constantly being drained by the unproductive one. But here's the paradox. In those brief periods when Argentina stabilizes, when trust returns for even a year or two, you can make more money and live better than almost anywhere else in the world. The country has incredible potential. The talent is there, the resources are there, the entrepreneurial energy is there. But it never lasts, because the political system can't hold itself together long enough to build anything permanent. There's a phrase people use to describe Argentina's history: never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And that's the trap. Argentina isn't poor, it's exhausting. It has everything it needs to succeed: land, resources, education, talent. But it can't achieve the one thing it needs most: stability. And without stability, none of the potential matters. Because who invests in a country where the rules change every few years? Who builds for the future when the future is always uncertain? Argentina's trap isn't that it makes bad decisions. It's that it can't stick to any decision long enough to see it through. So here we are, two countries, two completely different problems. Japan has stability, it has social trust, it has functioning institutions, but it can't generate momentum. It can't restart growth. It can't break out of a system that's optimized entirely for comfort and risk avoidance. Argentina has potential, it has energy, it has resources and talent, but it can't build stability. It can't create trust. It can't hold the system together long enough to turn potential into reality. And both are trapped, not by policy, not by culture, but by expectations. In Japan, people expect nothing will change. And because they expect nothing will change, they don't take risks. And because nobody takes risks, nothing changes. In Argentina, people expect everything will collapse. And because they expect collapse, they protect themselves immediately. And because everyone protects themselves, the collapse happens. Both are rational responses to the systems they live in. Both are self-fulfilling. And both are nearly impossible to break. Because here's the uncomfortable truth about economies. They're not just about policy or resources or technology. They're about expectations. What people believe about the future shapes the future. If people believe the economy will grow, they invest, they take risks, they build for the long term, and that belief creates growth. If people believe the economy will stagnate, they save, they avoid risk, they optimize for safety, and that belief creates stagnation. If people believe the system will collapse, they pull their money out, they protect themselves, they stop trusting institutions, and that belief creates collapse. Japan and Argentina show us what happens when expectations freeze. Japan froze around comfort. Argentina froze around chaos. And once those expectations set in, once an entire society internalizes them, breaking free becomes almost impossible. Not because the solution doesn't exist, but because implementing the solution requires people to believe it will work. And if they don't believe, it won't. This isn't just about two countries on opposite sides of the world. It's about what happens when societies face the same fundamental challenge. How do you maintain momentum without sacrificing stability, or build stability without killing momentum? And the uncomfortable reality is that many countries today are drifting toward one extreme or the other. Some are prioritizing comfort and safety at the expense of dynamism. Others are chasing growth while institutions crumble. And both paths lead to versions of the same trap. Because stability without momentum becomes stagnation. Momentum without stability becomes chaos. Japan and Argentina are the extremes, but the trade-off they represent between comfort and change, between trust and growth, is universal. And what they show us is that there's no perfect path, only choices and consequences. There are 4 types of economies in the world: developed, underdeveloped, Japan, and Argentina. Japan has everything it needs to fail, but it doesn't. Argentina has everything it needs to succeed, but it doesn't. The question isn't which one got it right. The question is, which trap are you willing to live in? Comfort without change, or change without stability? Both countries made rational choices to avoid what they feared most, and both got trapped anyway.